Hey there. We're doing a bonus episode, if you will, with Leela Srinivasan. Did I get that right?
You did, yes.
I did. That's awesome. Okay. And who is the CMO of SurveyMonkey. And if you've just found this on renegade.com, you'll want to listen to the regular episode first. But what we're going to do now is we're going to do a quick tutorial on surveys. You're a B2B organization. There are lots of ways that you can field surveys. And let's start maybe, is there a B2B brand that you're working with right now that you think is using your platform in an interesting way? That might be a good place to inspire folks.
Oh, goodness. Is there a B2B brand? So I think I am currently most inspired by what Box is doing in the enterprise. And so Box is on a kind of on the track to try and provide what they call mind-blowing experiences to their customers. And so what Box has realized is that in order to deliver these mind-blowing experiences, they need to be listening to their customers throughout that customer journey, gathering feedback through surveys, and making sure that that feedback is part of the kind of the central nervous system of Box, as Box is on the front lines dealing with those customers, helping them solve problems, helping them navigate their products and so forth. And so I think Box has done a tremendous job of embracing our enterprise SurveyMonkey system and leveraging our integration with systems of record that they use, most notably Salesforce, to make sure that as they are gathering that feedback, it is flowing straight into Salesforce and enabling their folks in customer success and sales and marketing and so forth to really have a full understanding of the customer. So I think I think we talk about customer journey so much, and it can be really hard to form a single opinion of what any one customer is going through. But I think the way they use SurveyMonkey Enterprise in conjunction with integrations to make that happen is really a great example for any organization to follow.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people would think about voice of the customer research as an aggregate thing and not as an individual thing that a salesperson or a customer rep could actually use to help inform their service. So that's really interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and in fact, Drew, if I may, even you can go earlier in the customer lifecycle. So here at SurveyMonkey, we leverage our integration with Marketo, so that when a potential next customer completes a form to ask for a demo request, then they receive an email which embedded into which is a short survey, so we can understand more about them before our BDR or SDR picks up the phone and has a conversation with them. And all of that information actually flows into Marketo. And so we're creating ways to accelerate the discussion, if you will, on an individual basis, by knowing more about that individual prospect.
So, okay, we're going really basic here. First, you have to decide that, let's assume we've made the decision, we're going to do some research. What's the biggest mistake that organizations typically make when they start they say, okay, we need to do some research on this?
Well, and this actually goes back to my consulting days. Before I got into marketing, I was in management consulting. And one of the things we used to do in consulting was to do what we would call blanking out the deck. In other words, you sort of have to start with the end in mind, know the specific questions that you were trying to understand or trying to get to the bottom of. And if you can visualize what the output would look like, what the slides might look like that you're presenting in the next board meeting or at your next executive team meeting, then that can help to inform the question set. So that's sort of, the place I always start is, what are we really trying to understand, and what would we hope to learn? Like, what's the hypothesis that would underpin this particular survey?
And I love that. And that's often the way we use it for our clients, where we're helping to use the surveys to get some content, right? But the challenge there is, or not challenge, but often you bring confirmation bias to this, and you design the survey to get the answers that you want. Right? And that's not hard. That's one way to do it, is to design it to get the answers that you want. Another way to do it is to misdesign it because you don't know how to ask the right questions, right? So how do you help, or, confirmation bias is such a natural thing, right? I mean, it is sort of the beginning of curiosity. Is it, well, I think I know what the answer is, but if I ask these questions this way, I can pretty much confirm.
Yeah. That's a good question. So I think you have to try and be as objective as possible and really map out the mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive reasons for something being the way it is. And so I think this gets at, if you're asking the question of why X, then the options that you offer up become really important to make sure you're trying to cover as many of the bases as possible without overwhelming the respondent with a laundry list that is 3.5 screens long, right? So I think one very practical thing you can do is, before you launch any survey, is run it by a few people in the organization, because invariably, I think if you design this survey in a silo and have a really strong idea of what you're going after, it's much likelier that you will miss something if you don't open up to feedback from your colleagues in helping to strengthen the storyline and strengthen the understanding of the underlying issue.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point. And I just want to bring, a lot of times when we pre-test surveys, we're just testing to make sure they work.
Right. We're
Right?
focused on the logic,
Exactly.
and that's fine, right? You want to check that too. You want to make sure that if you're forcing somebody to give an other answer, that they actually tell you what the other is, or
Right.
whatever, or that they can't choose two answers that are contradictory. And that's essential. But you also have to just kind of take a step back and look at the specifics, look at the real guts of the content, and ask yourself, get those other opinions to flag any blind spots.
So one of the big issues with surveys and fielding the surveys, particularly if you're trying to create, say, in information that you could use in PR, right? You want to come up with an idea that the brand can own. Like you guys could have a curiosity index where you measure how curious is America versus London versus, and you would have this global curiosity index. You could, the way you design that research obviously is important, but who you ask is
Mm,
also important, right?
absolutely.
Because, there is some, very little, but there is some online bias. The offer that you put out there could create a bias too. And so, because people there's a value exchange here, and some people will be fine with a $5 gift card, but other people might need $200 to $100 to get their time. So how do you sort of recommend folks, and that was like 5 questions in one, but right, from an audience standpoint, when you're just sort of building who you talk to, what are some of the sort of the guidance that you provide in terms
Yeah.
of size? And I know that's like 50 questions. Good luck. Straighten it out for me.
All right. So in 5 words or less as well,
Yes,
right?
exactly.
So the first thing, I mean, so all those questions are very valid ones. And I guess the first thing I would say is don't just ask your friends, right? So I think there's a tendency to sort of be quote unquote lazy and pursue the audiences from whom you can get quick answers. And that's fine. You'll get a read, but it will often be a biased read unless you do open up to a broader audience. And your point on collectors, even, the ways in which you collect the feedback or the mechanisms that you use is a good one too, because certain, we for example, we enable surveys to be served up through Facebook Messenger, for instance. That will reach a certain audience that other mechanisms might not. We also offer something called SurveyMonkey Anywhere, which allows people to gather feedback at trade shows or on the factory floor or somewhere where there isn't Wi-Fi connectivity.
Yep.
So I think definitely thinking about the different populations that you're able to tap into. Some of those you'll be able to get to yourselves. Others you can turn to third-party services. We happen to offer a panel called SurveyMonkey Audience, which it is so fast to deploy to, and we can help you to diversify your audience as well there. So definitely be thinking about the diversity of the audience, and again, thinking ahead to the output that you want to share with your key audiences. Are there specific populations, do you want to segment based on age or gender or ethnicity or a particular segment that matters to you, and make sure that you are asking enough of those people to hit your quota or your targets.
I'm so glad you brought up SurveyMonkey Anywhere, because I was with a group of CMOs recently down in DC, and one of the questions came up about event experiences and how
Mm-hmm.
expensive it was to do them. And one of the suggestions that I made to them was, well, while you have these folks there and you're giving all this value, give them a minute survey on an iPad, and then suddenly you have research that you can use to extend the event. You could, well, at minimum, measure the experience that they just had, but ideally you can be gathering information that can continue the story. It's sort of like what you did with the launch of Power the Curious, because you've got folks to sort of fill out these surveys, and then that became content which you could then extend out later on. So
that's actually on the topic of events. I've the last couple of speaking engagements I've done, I've embedded a QR code in my slides that if you have an iPhone, you can just flip open the camera and it will automatically take you to a survey link, and you can get that 3-question survey filled out on the spot by the audience and have your phone open and actually see the results as they come in and be able to real time share insights back with the audience. And it just adds another layer of interaction to your presentation.
Here we are. We're all thinking that QR codes are dead, but what's funny is that in this I was at an event the other day, and someone just popped in. The LinkedIn has a QR code that I don't know how recently they added, but suddenly everybody in the room started using it, and it became the fastest way of exchanging information. And I thought, oh my God, this is like what Snapchat was doing before Snapchat died, which I thought might save the QR codes, but that's not going to happen. Did people do it? I mean, because QR codes in and of itself is one of those things that just seems to have done great in Japan, and then Americans just have not adopted it.
Yeah, totally. So I had the same degree of skepticism around QR codes in general before we actually launched this. And I think the difference is if you have an iPhone with our QR code, you don't need to download a reader or have any other sort of technology, right? It is literally as simple as pointing your camera at the screen as if you're about to take a picture of it, and that URL will just pop open in your browser. And so I think it's become so seamless and so easy that we definitely are seeing a lot of uptake in that type of situation. Now, I will also say, when I was speaking in Mexico last year, I tried the same thing, and iPhone doesn't have quite the same penetration down south of the border as it does north. And so I didn't get the same volume of responses, and so I think, to your point around, do people actually do this or not? If you're relying on them to have a QR code reader on their phone that they have to go fiddle around with, maybe it's not quite as much of a slam dunk, but thanks Apple, I guess.
Yes, exactly. It's not going to happen now. And one of the other keys there is you mentioned only having like 3 questions. And so this study that we did recently for my book, we promised that it was a 4-minute survey or less. And in fact, the average was 3 minutes and 51 seconds. Is there, from a length standpoint, there were many other questions that I wanted to ask, but I said I'd rather hit my response number so that I had statistically significant, as opposed to getting a few more pieces of information. And I know there's a trade-off, right? There must be a curve, but we got 100% of the people who started the survey completed the survey, which is a good sign that you're not too long, right? What is the threshold, or is there one, for length?
It's a great question, and there is definitely a curve and a trade-off that you make. So I think what you described in terms of really disciplining yourself to ask fewer questions in the hope of getting higher quality information is definitely, I think, a great way to go. And one thing you might want to think about within even that construct is, what types of question are you answering? And so what we do see is, we see a lot of people, and I suppose this is the curiosity, the downfall of curiosity is, you can be endlessly curious about what your customers are thinking, or what your prospects or your employees are thinking. But in the construct of the survey, if you have too many open-ended questions where you're expecting people to actually generate that content or that idea, then that's where you start to see your response rates kind of really, really sort of go down. And so another important consideration is, what is your blend of multiple choice, easy for somebody to quickly answer, versus the questions where you're making them think a bit harder, because that will impact your response rate as well.
Yeah, exactly. I did a couple of true false questions right away, just to make it easy. Oh, this is going to be easy. Oh, wait, not quite that easy, but and that makes a lot of sense. Now, you were starting to get at this issue, which I talked a little bit about, which is, the questions that you ask matter, and how you ask the questions. But there's also this other big, massive issue, which is there's no shortage of data, but there's definitely a dearth of insights, right? I mean, you can ask this and there's not enough time to analyze all this stuff. And this is where I would say that there is some science, some research professionals. It's not anthropology, but they're people who understand the meaning of questions and linguistics. And these are people who get paid to create tests, right?
Mm-hmm.
They actually know what it means to ask a question. How do organizations, and we're talking, say, mid-sized B2B businesses, make sure that they're actually finding insights out of all this data?
Yeah, it's a good question. And one I think that at SurveyMonkey, we're actually investing quite heavily in our analyzed dashboards, which are where your results are aggregated in a way that you can hopefully easily understand the output and share it with broader sections of your organization. So back to the question design and understanding what you're trying to solve for at the very outset. I think that can help. And then as we continue to go forward, we'll keep investing in that analyzed portion to try and make it easier and easier for people to really digest and know what to do with the results.
So this is where you're getting at sort of the AI in terms of both using it to help form the questions as well as sort of how to interpret it.
Yep. So there's the AI or ML portion on the front end of where we help you to hopefully optimize your question set. So the particular questions that you're asking, as well as the set of potential answers. So through our 19 plus years of learning, continuously learning from all of the surveys flowing through our system, we have pretty good insight, as you can imagine, on the format of questions that will work and the options that you should offer up to respond. So we're doing that guiding on the front end. We're also scoring surveys through SurveyMonkey Genius to make sure that you give yourself the best possible chance of quality answers, quality responses. And then on the back end, as the results start to flow in, those are surfaced in what we call our analyzed dashboards. And that is the opportunity for you to really better understand the information that's flowing in. And as we continue to make that information shareable with your broader organization, that will help you to socialize the findings and have the really important discussion of, okay, what do we do with this? What is next?
Right. Yeah, where I was going is, and it's interesting because you went into sort of package and distribute, and where I was going is, it takes certain types of minds to connect disparate dots. And it's unlikely that a computer would have been able to write the line "power the curious," right? Because that's not even structurally sort of, one might argue that that's even not quite a sentence, not quite words that are sort of, whoa, there's something goofy going on that allows you to think about those words differently, and which is why they work so well, right? There's something off about it that makes it, you go, wait, I'm curious about that. And a computer can't do that. And so that kind of, so the research might have found this notion of curiosity as something, but I guess what I'm trying to get to is the human part of interpretation and the need to have individuals who can not just crunch the numbers, but sort of think about the data imaginatively.
Yeah, and I think that's a really prized skill set. And fortunately, I don't think that need is going anywhere. I think that people who can bring that eye for the insight to the table are already in high demand, and I think will remain in high demand as we go forward. I think the one thing that we are doing to help accelerate the understanding of the results is to help organizations put them in the context of other data that they might have at their disposal. So we see organizations pushing survey results into other systems of record. We see them pushing SurveyMonkey data into Tableau and pairing it with other data to better understand just the correlations and how specific aspects of respondents might tie in with the results. So this is why I think data science, analytics, insights, I mean, these are all such hot areas within marketing and well beyond marketing. And so I suppose the good news is that as we continue to evolve the tools and the technology to deliver more AI, to deliver more machine learning, to help answer those questions, we still at this point need that human interjection to really fully interpret. And I think this is where the open-ended questions of really hearing that voice of customer layered in with some of the numerical results really kind of kick your understanding up a notch.
Okay, so we're going to wrap this up, but I have to ask a question. Could you guys come up with something other than NPS, please? I feel like you're in you're on the brink. It's funny, you guys are the facilitator for all this research, but you haven't developed like a proprietary thing, and yet you own you probably could. I was with somebody, a CMO said, well, our NPS is 92. And I went, okay, that's ridiculous. That's useless and absolutely stupid information, right? What do they do? Oh, we're perfect. What? So I don't know. I'm very familiar with it. I've seen it used, and I've seen it used with it's dumb information is the problem.
Well, I hear you, Drew. So I think two things. Number one, and I say this full disclosure, I worked at Bain and Company, and NPS was developed out of Bain IP, right?
Yeah, of course. So Fred Reichheld, yes.
Exactly. So it was developed as the ultimate loyalty metric, like the ultimate indicator of whether or not a customer is likely to stay or go. I think it still has a ton of utility in that area. And what is important is not the question or the score itself, but the why, and doing that root cause analysis to understand the drivers of that over time. So that's the first thing. The second is I will take your challenge back to my head of research, and I will tell him that Drew asked or challenged us to come up with something, and maybe it's a discussion that we just might have.
There you go. All right, love that. So let's wrap this up part. I think it's really helpful. 2 do's and a don't. You're a B2B marketer. You're thinking about all the research that you're doing. Sort of two do's and a don't.
All right, the do's. Do listen incessantly to your customers. You cannot have enough customer feedback. Do think about how you can package that in a way that will benefit future generations of customers. Don't just ask your friends.
There you go. Perfect. And the last thing I want to add, and this is one of the things that we've done a lot, is think about the research not just as a dead end that you get some information and maybe you make a change here. If you do your research right, there's so often there's PRable opportunity that can come out of it. And so one study equals multiple pieces of content as well as potential organizational change or product change or service change and all this good stuff. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Leela, for part 2 of a really, really interesting episode. And I wish you all the best of luck.
Thank you so much, Drew. It's been a pleasure.
All right. We are off the air.